On his 70th birthday, he blew out the candles, only to wake up in a locked hospital room, labeled insane by his own daughter. But what she didn't know was that someone had been watching her all along. The candles flickered like tiny trembling witnesses, 70 of them, their warm glow reflected in the crystal glasses, the polished marble floors, the expensive smiles of people who didn't really know him, but were eager to be seen knowing him. Edward Hayes sat at the head of the table, shoulders straight, hands resting calmly beside his plate. 70 years old. A lifetime of building, investing, surviving, from nothing to everything. And tonight, everything felt just a little too perfect. "Come on, Dad." Claire laughed softly, standing beside him. "Make a wish." Her voice was warm, loving, practiced. Edward turned to look at her. His only daughter. Elegant, composed, always in control. She had planned this entire evening down to the smallest detail. The guest list, the lighting, even the music that now played gently in the background like a memory trying too hard to be remembered. "You've outdone yourself," Edward said. Claire smiled. "You deserve it." Did I? For a split second, something in his chest tightened. Not pain. Not yet. Just a flicker of unease. Like a draft in a closed room. Around them guests leaned in, phones ready. A few whispered. Others raised glasses. Speech. Speech. Edward chuckled lightly, standing up with slow, measured grace. His body still strong for his age, but not invincible. He adjusted his cufflinks, scanning the room. Business partners. Old acquaintances. A few unfamiliar faces. Too many unfamiliar faces. "I won't keep this long," he began, voice steady, commanding without effort. 70 years teaches you a few things. A pause. That nothing lasts unless you protect it. His eyes drifted just briefly back to Claire. She was smiling, but her eyes didn't smile. Applause followed. Polite. Perfect. Claire stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Okay, that's enough wisdom for one night," she teased. "Time for cake." Laughter. The staff moved in like choreography, precise, silent. The cake was brought out. 3 tiers, white and gold, flawless. Edward sat back down. A glass of wine was placed beside him. Deep red. Expensive. "From 1986, Claire said softly. "The year I was born." He raised an eyebrow. "You've been planning this for a while." "Of course," she said. He lifted the glass. For a moment he hesitated. Something about the scent felt off. Not wrong. Just unfamiliar. "You're not going to leave me hanging, are you?" Claire said lightly. He smiled. "Wouldn't dream of it." He took a sip. Smooth. Rich. And then, a faint bitterness at the back of his throat. Barely noticeable. Barely. The candles were relit as everyone gathered closer. "Make a wish," someone shouted again. Edward leaned forward, closed his eyes. And for a brief second, a strange thought crossed his mind. Protect what you built. He exhaled and blew out the candles. Cheers erupted. Hands clapped. Glasses clinked. Music swelled louder. But beneath the noise, something shifted. Edward blinked. The room tilted just slightly. He straightened in his chair. "Dad." Claire's voice came closer now. Too close. "I'm fine," he said quickly. But his vision blurred at the edges, like ink bleeding into water. The lights seemed brighter. The laughter louder. Distorted. He reached for the table. Missed. A wave of dizziness hit him, sharp, sudden. "What?" he muttered. Claire's hand tightened around his arm. "Easy," she whispered. Not worried. Not surprised. Controlled. Edward looked at her again, really looked this time. And for the first time that night, he didn't see a daughter. He saw a plan. The room spun harder now. Voices stretched and warped. Someone gasped. A chair scraped. "Call someone," a voice shouted. But it all felt distant. Muffled. Like he was already leaving. Edward tried to stand, but his legs didn't respond. His body betrayed him. His mind still awake. Still screaming. Something's wrong. Claire leaned closer, her lips near his ear. And in a voice no one else could hear, she whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad, but this is the only way." Darkness surged in. Fast. Cold. Final. The last thing Edward saw was her face. Calm, certain, and completely unafraid of what she had just done. Then, nothing. The first thing Edward Hayes noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the suffocating kind. No music, no laughter, no clinking glasses. Just a low, constant hum, mechanical, cold, unfamiliar. He tried to open his eyes. Heavy, like someone had poured concrete over his eyelids. His fingers twitched. Slow. Weak. Where am I? A sharp smell filled his nose, sterile, chemical. Hospitals had a scent you never forgot, no matter how many years passed. And this was unmistakably one of them. Edward forced his eyes open. White. Everything was white. White ceiling. White walls. White lights that burned into his vision like interrogation lamps. He blinked again, trying to focus. The edges of the room came into view, blurry at first, then sharper. A bed. Metal rails. A monitor beside him, blinking in steady rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. His chest tightened. Not from pain but from realization. This wasn't just a hospital. Felt controlled. Contained. Edward tried to sit up. The moment he moved, a sharp pull stopped him. He looked down. Straps. Leather restraints across his wrists. Tight. Real. What the hell? His voice came out dry, cracked. Barely more than a whisper. Panic flickered. Then grew. He pulled harder. The straps didn't budge. His heart rate spiked. The monitor responded instantly, its beeping quickening. Beep. 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 Footsteps. The door opened. A man in a white coat walked in, followed by a nurse. Both calm. Too calm. Mr. Hayes, the doctor said, voice smooth and measured. Good to see you're awake. Edward stared at him, confusion turning into anger. Where am I? The doctor didn't answer immediately. He checked the monitor, adjusted something on the 4-line. Routine. Detached. You're in a private care facility, he said finally. Edward's jaw tightened. Then why am I tied to a bed? The nurse avoided eye contact. The doctor sighed slightly, as if this conversation had already happened a dozen times. For your safety. My safety. Edward snapped, his voice gaining strength. Untie me. The doctor exchanged a quick glance with the nurse, then looked back at Edward with something that almost resembled sympathy. You had an episode last night, Mr. Hayes. Edward froze. What episode? The doctor stepped closer, lowering his voice. You became disoriented, aggressive. You didn't recognize your own daughter. That landed like a punch. Claire. The memory flickered. Candles, wine, her voice in his ear. I'm sorry, Dad, but this is the only way. Edward's breathing slowed. Not because he was calm, because he was thinking. No, he said quietly. That's not what happened. The doctor's expression didn't change. We have documentation, he replied. Witness statements. Medical observations. That's a lie. The words came out sharper this time. The nurse shifted uncomfortably. Edward leaned forward as much as the restraints allowed. I was at my birthday dinner. I had a drink. Then everything went black. The doctor nodded slowly, like he was indulging a child. That's consistent with your condition. Edward stared at him. My condition? A pause. Then the doctor said it. Early onset psychotic disorder. Rapid progression. Silence. The words hung in the air like poison. Edward let out a short, disbelieving laugh. That's ridiculous. You've been showing signs for weeks, the doctor continued. Paranoia. Memory lapses. Erratic behavior. No, Edward said, firmer now. No, I haven't. The doctor reached into a folder at the foot of the bed, pulled out a stack of papers. Your daughter brought these in, he said. Medical records. Evaluations. He handed them over. Edward's hands were still strapped, but the nurse gently lifted the pages so he could see. Signatures. Dates. Diagnoses. All official. All wrong. Edward scanned them, his mind racing. This was too clean. Too complete. Like it had been prepared in advance. His chest tightened again, but this time not from fear. From clarity. He looked up. Where is Claire? The doctor hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Then, as your legal guardian, she authorized your admission. Edward felt the ground drop beneath him. Legal guardian, he repeated slowly. Yes, the doctor said. Given your condition, she now has temporary control over your medical and financial decisions. There it was. Not confusion. Not concern. Control. Edward's pulse steadied. His mind sharpened. Piece by piece the puzzle began to form. The dinner. The drink. The whisper. The documents. This place. It wasn't an accident. It was a setup. He leaned back against the pillow, suddenly still. The doctor watched him carefully. You need rest, he said. We'll begin treatment shortly. Edward didn't respond. He just stared at the ceiling, thinking, calculating, waiting. Because one thing was now painfully clear. His daughter hadn't saved him. She had locked him away. And whatever game she was playing, he was already inside it. Claire Hayes didn't rush. She never rushed. That was the first thing people admired about her. And the last thing they realized too late. The morning after the party, she stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror, adjusting a strand of hair that had fallen slightly out of place. Her expression was calm, almost serene, as if nothing extraordinary had happened the night before. As if her father hadn't just been taken away in an ambulance. As if she hadn't orchestrated every second of it. Her phone buzzed softly on the marble counter. She picked it up. A message from the facility. Patient stable. Sedation effective. Awaiting further instructions. Claire read it once. Then locked the screen. No reaction. No hesitation. Just quiet confirmation. Good, she murmured. Behind her, the penthouse stretched wide and silent. Sunlight poured through the glass walls, illuminating everything Edward had spent a lifetime building. Now it was hers to control. For now. Claire walked slowly into the living room, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She stopped near Edward's desk, massive dark oak untouched since last night. She ran her fingers across its surface. This should have happened sooner, she whispered. But her voice wasn't bitter. It was relieved. She opened a drawer. Inside were neatly organized files. Contracts, investments, property deeds. Power. All of it. And for years she had been waiting. Not for permission. For opportunity. Her phone buzzed again. Another message this time. From a private contact. Lawyer confirmed. Documents processed. You now have temporary authority. Claire exhaled slowly. That was the final piece. Legal control. Medical control. Financial control. Her father wasn't just locked in a room. He was erased from his own life. She picked up one of the folders, flipping through it with practiced ease. Numbers, assets, offshore accounts. Everything Edward had built through decades of discipline and sacrifice. And everything she was about to reshape. But then, her hand paused. Just for a second. A name. Not in the financial records. In her mind. A memory she had spent years burying. A small voice. A child's voice. Mommy. Claire shut the folder instantly. Her jaw tightened. No, she whispered sharply, as if cutting the thought out before it could grow. That part of her life was gone. Buried. It had to stay that way. Because if it didn't, everything she just gained could collapse. She walked to the window, staring out over the city skyline. From this height, everything looked small. Manageable. Controlled. Just the way she liked it. But control required precision. And precision required silence. Her phone buzzed again, this time a call. She answered without hesitation. Yes. A man's voice on the other end. Low. Cautious. It's done. The records are clean. No one's going to question the diagnosis. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. No one. We used licensed templates. Real signatures. Even cross-referenced hospital data. It's airtight. She nodded, though he couldn't see it. And the staff. They've been briefed. As far as they're concerned, your father is exactly where he belongs. Claire turned slightly, glancing back at the empty room behind her. Good. A pause. Then the man added. There is one thing. Claire's expression sharpened. What? Someone's been asking questions. Silence. The air shifted. Who? She asked. We're not sure yet. A man. Mid-30s. Keeps his distance. But he's been digging into your background. Claire's grip on the phone tightened. That's not possible. That's what I thought too, the man said. But he's persistent. Her mind moved fast now, calculating, scanning possibilities. No one knew. No one was supposed to know. Unless. No. She shut that thought down immediately. Find out who he is, she said coldly. And stop him. We're working on it. The call ended. Claire lowered the phone slowly. For the first time since the plan began, something felt off. Not wrong, but exposed. She walked back to the desk, placing both hands firmly against its surface. Stay focused, she muttered. This was bigger than fear. Bigger than doubt. She had come too far. Done too much. There was no going back. But somewhere, far from this polished penthouse, in a modest home across the city, a little girl sat at a kitchen table coloring quietly. And across from her, a man watched. Silent. Patient. Waiting. Because unlike Claire, he wasn't trying to take something. He was trying to reveal it. And sooner or later, the truth she buried was coming back. Claire didn't sleep that night. Not because she was afraid. Because her mind wouldn't stop moving. Every step of the plan had been calculated. Every risk measured. Every outcome anticipated. That's how she survived, by staying 10 steps ahead of everyone else. But now, there was a variable she hadn't accounted for. Someone asking questions. She sat in the dim light of her office, a single lamp casting long shadows across the desk. The city outside had gone quiet, but her world hadn't. Claire opened her laptop, typed in a secure search. Old records. Old names. Old places she hadn't looked at in years. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Then, she typed it. A name she hadn't spoken out loud in nearly a decade. The screen loaded. Nothing official. No recent data. But that didn't mean anything. People disappear all the time. Especially when someone wants them to. Claire leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. Stay buried, she whispered. But memories don't listen. They wait. And when they come back, they don't knock. 7 years earlier, rain poured heavily against the windshield, blurring the world into streaks of gray. Claire gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles pale, her breathing uneven. In the back seat, a small voice. Mommy, where are we going? Claire didn't answer. Her jaw was clenched so tight it hurt. Mommy. The voice came again. Softer this time. Uncertain. Claire's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. A little girl. White eyes. Small hands clutching a worn stuffed toy. Trusting. Completely. Claire looked away immediately. Just a stop, she said flatly. The car slowed as it pulled into a quiet residential street. No traffic. No people. Just rows of modest houses and dim porch lights glowing through the rain. She parked. Turned off the engine. The silence inside the car was deafening. The child leaned forward slightly. Are we home? Claire closed her eyes. For a moment, just a moment, something inside her wavered. Then it hardened again. No, she said. She stepped out of the car, rain instantly soaking through her coat. She walked around, opened the back door. Come on. The girl hesitated. But it's raining. Now. The tone left no room for argument. The child climbed out slowly, holding the toy close to her chest. Her small shoes splashed lightly in the puddles. Claire grabbed a small bag from the seat and placed it in the girl's hands. Take this. What is it? Just take it. The girl nodded, confused but obedient. They stood there for a few seconds. Rain falling harder. Wind picking up. Mommy. Are you coming with me? Claire didn't answer. She couldn't. As if she did, she might not be able to leave. Instead, she crouched down, forcing herself to look directly into the child's eyes. Listen to me, she said, her voice controlled but tight. You're going to knock on that door. She pointed to a house nearby. A warm light glowed from inside. They'll take care of you. The girl blinked. But what about you? Claire swallowed. Hard. I have to go. Silence. Then, did I do something wrong? The question cut deeper than anything else. For a split second, Claire's composure cracked. Her hand lifted, almost instinctively, to touch the girl's face. But she stopped, pulled it back. No, she said quickly. This is This is better for you. The girl didn't understand. How could she? Tears mixed with rain on her cheeks. I want to stay with you. Claire stood up abruptly. Go, she said. The word came out sharper than she intended. The girl flinched. But she turned. Slowly. Walking toward the house. Each step smaller than the last. She reached the door. Knocked. Once. Twice. Claire didn't wait. She turned. Got back into the car. Started the engine. And drove away. She didn't look back. Not once. Present day. Claire's eyes snapped open. Her breathing was shallow. For a moment she just sat there, staring into nothing. Then, she reached for a glass of water, her hand slightly unsteady. That's over, she said under her breath. It's done. But her voice didn't sound convinced. Because somewhere in this city, that child wasn't gone. That mistake wasn't erased. It was alive. Growing. Waiting. And now, someone was connecting the dots. Claire stood up slowly, her expression hardening once again. Whoever you are, she whispered, you should have stayed out of this. Because if the truth came out, not only would she lose everything she just gained, she would lose control. And for Claire Hayes, that was the one thing she would never allow. The little girl didn't remember the night clearly anymore. Not the rain. Not the cold. Not even the exact moment the car drove away. What she remembered was the feeling of standing alone, of knocking on a stranger's door, and not knowing if anyone would answer. The door had opened slowly. A man stood there, mid-30s, tired eyes, holding a mug of coffee like he hadn't slept in days. He looked down, saw her, soaked, shivering, silent. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then he crouched down. Hey! His voice was gentle, careful. Are you okay? The girl didn't answer. She just held out the small bag. The man took it, confused. Opened it. Inside, few clothes, a birth certificate, and a folded note. His expression changed as he read it. Not shock. Not anger. Something quieter. He looked back at the girl. Did your mom leave you here? A small nod. The man exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. All right, he said softly. Okay. He stood up, stepping aside. Come in. That was the moment everything changed. Present day. 7 years later. The same house. The same door. But everything inside was different. Warm. Lived in. Safe. The little girl now sat at the kitchen table, swinging her legs slightly as she colored on a sheet of paper. The crayon moved carefully in her hand, filling in shapes with quiet focus. Her name was Lily Brooks, and she had no idea who she really was. Across from her, the man from that night leaned against the counter, watching her. Daniel Brooks. Not her biological father, but the only father she had ever known. You're going outside the lines again, he said lightly. Lily looked up, smiling. It still looks pretty. Daniel chuckled. Yeah, it does. There was a softness in his voice, a kind of quiet pride, because he had built this life from nothing. Not planned, not expected, but real. He glanced at the clock, then back at her. Hey, he said. Finish that up. We've got somewhere to go later. Where? She asked. Daniel hesitated. Just somewhere important. She nodded, not questioning it. Kids didn't always need answers. They trusted. And that trust was exactly what made this so hard. Daniel turned away, walking into the living room. On the table, a folder. Thick, organized, carefully prepared. He opened it. Inside were documents, photos, records, and one name that appeared again and again. Claire Hayes. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. 7 years. 7 years of raising a child that wasn't his. 7 years of wondering why someone would walk away from their own daughter like that. First, he told himself it didn't matter. That the past was the past. That Lily was safe now, and that was enough. But questions don't disappear. They grow. And over time they demand answers. He picked up a photo. Claire. Elegant. Composed. Standing beside powerful people. Smiling like she owned the world. Daniel stared at it. You don't just walk away from a kid like that, he muttered. He flipped to another page. legal records, financial links, recent activity. Claire wasn't just living her life. She was rising, fast. And now, she had control of her father's entire estate. That's when things started to feel wrong. Too fast, too clean, too convenient. Daniel had seen enough in life to recognize patterns, and this one didn't sit right. He walked back into the kitchen. Lily was still coloring, humming softly to herself, carefree, untouched by the truth. "Hey," he said gently. She looked up. "Yeah." He crouched down in front of her, resting his arms on the table. "You trust me, right?" She nodded immediately. "Of course." That answer hit harder than anything else. Daniel forced a small smile. Good. Because what he was about to do could change everything. For both of them. He stood up, grabbing the folder. "Finish up," he said again. "We're leaving soon." Lily tilted her head. "Is it serious?" Daniel paused at the doorway. Then, "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is." Because somewhere across the city, a woman was trying to erase her past. And somewhere else, a man was ready to bring it back. Not for revenge, not for money, but for something much harder to face. The truth. And once that truth came out, there would be no way to bury it again. Edward stopped resisting. That was the first thing they noticed. No more pulling against the straps. No more arguing with the staff. No more sharp questions or raised voice. Just silence. Stillness. Compliance. From the outside it looked like progress. From the inside, it was strategy. He lay on the bed, eyes half open, staring at the ceiling like a man who had finally accepted his condition. But his mind had never been clearer. They want me to look broken. So he gave them exactly that. Patient shows reduced agitation, responding to sedation, cognitive resistance decreasing. Edward listened carefully every time they spoke, even when they thought he couldn't hear. Especially then. He tracked everything. The timing of the medication, the shift changes, which nurse talked too much, which one avoided eye contact, and which doctor hesitated, because hesitation meant doubt, and doubt was a crack. 3 days in, the door opened again. A different doctor this time. Older, sharper eyes, less rehearsed. He stepped inside, flipping through a tablet. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "how are we feeling today?" Edward didn't respond immediately. He blinked slowly, turned his head just enough to acknowledge him. "Tired," he murmured. The doctor studied him for a moment. "Any confusion? Hallucinations?" A pause. Edward swallowed. "Sometimes," he said weakly. "Not too convincing. Not too dramatic. Just enough." The doctor nodded slightly. "Good. That's expected." Expected. Edward locked that word away. The doctor stepped closer, checking his pulse manually this time, not relying on machines. That meant something. "You're improving," the doctor said. "If this continues, we may reduce restraints soon." Edward didn't react. But inside, that was the first real opening. Later that night, the lights dimmed, the hallway quieted, and Edward waited. Timing mattered. Everything depended on timing. The door opened slightly. A nurse stepped in, young, maybe late 20s. She carried a tray. Routine. Predictable. She didn't look at him right away. Just went through the motions. "Medication time," she said softly. Edward turned his head slowly, eyes unfocused. "Water," he whispered. She nodded, stepping closer. "Careful. Too careful." As she reached to lift his head slightly, Edward let his body go slack, heavier than expected. She struggled just a bit. And that's when he saw it. Her name tag. Emily. And more importantly, the way her hands trembled. Not fear. Not exactly. Uncertainty. "Emily," he muttered weakly. She froze. Just for a second. "You know my name?" she asked. Edward blinked slowly. "You said it earlier." She hadn't. But she didn't correct him. Instead, something shifted in her expression. Human. Not clinical. That was the difference. Edward took the medication. Swallowed. Then, "Am I really sick?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air. Simple. but dangerous. Emily hesitated. She looked at the door, then back at him. I'm not allowed to discuss your diagnosis, she said. Not a no. Not a yes. A gap. Edward exhaled slowly, letting his eyes drift toward the ceiling again. I don't remember hurting anyone. His voice cracked just slightly. Not forced. Not exaggerated. Real enough to feel real. Emily's grip tightened on the tray. I'm sure there's just confusion, she said quickly. But she didn't sound sure. Edward turned his head again. Met her eyes. For the first time. Fully aware. Clear. Focused. Just for a second. Long enough for her to see it. Then. Gone. He blinked, slipping back into the role. Please, he whispered. I just want to go home. Emily stepped back. Something in her chest tightened. Because patients like him didn't usually sound like that. Didn't look like that. Didn't feel like that. She turned quickly, heading for the door. But before she left, she glanced back. Edward was staring at the ceiling again. Still. Silent. Harmless. And yet, something wasn't right. The next morning, Emily stood outside the records room, keycard in hand, heart beating just a little faster than normal. She hesitated, just for a second. Then, she swiped. The door clicked open, because doubt had already taken root. And once doubt begins, it doesn't stop. It grows. And Edward Hayes? He had just planted it. Daniel didn't go to the police. Not yet, because this wasn't just about a crime. It was about proof. And proof had to be undeniable. He sat in his car across the street from the facility. Engine off. Windows slightly fogged from his breath. From the outside, the building looked clean. Professional. Quiet. The kind of place families trusted. The kind of place no one questioned. Daniel stared at it for a long moment. Yeah, he muttered. That's exactly why you chose it. On the passenger seat beside him. The folder. Open now. Pages spread out like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. Claire's records. Edward Hayes' sudden diagnosis. The timeline. Too fast. Too convenient. Too perfect. Daniel had seen enough patterns in life to know when something was staged. And this was staged. He reached for his phone. Scrolled through contacts. Paused on one name. Then pressed call. Jacob? It's been a while. Daniel leaned back in his seat. Yeah, I know. A pause. Then the voice on the other end sharpened slightly. You don't call just to catch up. Daniel gave a faint smile. Still as sharp as ever. What do you need? Straight to the point. That's why Daniel trusted him. Jacob wasn't just an old friend. He used to work federal cases. Fraud. Financial crimes. Deep investigations. The kind that didn't leave loose ends. I need you to look into someone, Daniel said. Name. Claire Hayes. Silence. A few seconds longer than expected. Then, Hayes. Jacob repeated. As in Edward Hayes? Daniel's grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. You know him. I know of him, Jacob said. Big name. Clean reputation. Why? Daniel looked back at the building. Because his daughter just had him declared mentally unstable. Overnight. Another pause. Heavier this time. That doesn't happen overnight, Jacob said. Exactly. And you think it's fake? I don't think, Daniel replied quietly. I'm sure. Jacob exhaled slowly. All right, what else? Daniel hesitated. Then, there's a child involved. That changed the tone immediately. Go on. Daniel glanced down at the folder again. At Lily's birth certificate. At Claire's name printed clearly as the mother. She abandoned her daughter 7 years ago, Daniel said. Left her on a doorstep. And you have proof? I have enough. Jacob didn't respond right away. He was thinking. Connecting dots. That kind of thing doesn't stay buried forever, he said finally. No, Daniel replied. It doesn't. A beat. Then, what do you want from me? Jacob asked. Daniel's eyes returned to the facility. I want the truth documented, he said. Everything. Financial records. Medical filings. Legal transfers. You're talking about building a case. I am building a case. Jacob let out a quiet breath. You understand what that means, right? If you're right, this goes federal. Daniel didn't hesitate. That's the point. Silence again. Then, all right, Jacob said. Send me everything you've got. Daniel nodded, already reaching for the folder. There's more, he added. What? Daniel's voice lowered slightly. She doesn't know someone's watching her. A faint edge entered Jacob's tone. And you plan to keep it that way? For now. Because timing mattered. Just like Edward had learned. Wait. Watch. Then strike. Inside the facility, Emily stood in front of a computer screen. Heart racing. The system required clearance, authorization, and a reason. She had none. Not officially. But something about Edward Hayes didn't add up. She typed in his file, hesitated, then hit enter. The records loaded. Clean. Organized. Too clean. She scrolled. Medical history. Recent evaluations. Diagnosis. Everything looked legitimate. Until she noticed the timestamps. Her brow furrowed. That's not right. Multiple documents. Signed within minutes of each other. Different specialists. Different departments. Impossible. Her pulse quickened. She clicked deeper. Authorization logs. Access history. And then, a name. Claire Hayes. Repeated. Again. And again. And again. Emily leaned back slightly. That's not normal. Family members didn't have that level of access. Not this quickly. Not this thoroughly. Unless something had been arranged. Her stomach tightened. Because now, it wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was evidence. Edward lay still in his room, eyes closed, but the truth was already moving toward her, from two different directions, and when those paths finally crossed, there would be nowhere left to hide. Edward knew the moment things began to change. It wasn't something obvious. No alarms. No sudden confrontation. Just subtle shifts. The kind you only notice if you're paying attention. And Edward Hayes had been paying attention to everything. The morning routine came 5 minutes late. That never happened. The nurse who usually brought his medication didn't show. Instead, Emily walked in. Alone. No tray. No clipboard. Just her. Edward kept his eyes half closed, breathing slow, steady. Waiting. She closed the door behind her. Not all the way. But enough. That mattered. Footsteps approached. Stopped beside his bed. For a few seconds she said nothing. Then, Mr. Hayes, she whispered. Not patient. Not clinical. Personal. Edward didn't respond immediately. Then slowly, he opened his eyes. Confused. Weak. Playing the role. Emily, he murmured. Her expression tightened slightly. You remember my name? He blinked as if unsure. I think so. She studied him closely. Longer than before. Then, I checked your records, she said quietly. That was it. The crack had opened. Edward didn't move. Didn't react. But inside, everything sharpened. Okay, he said softly. Emily glanced toward the door. Then back at him. They don't make sense, she continued. The diagnosis, the timeline, it's wrong. Edward swallowed. I told you, he whispered. She shook her head slightly. No, this is different. Her voice dropped even lower. Your daughter. She pushed everything through. Too fast. Too clean. There it was. Confirmation. Not suspicion. Proof. Edward turned his head slowly, looking at her fully now. No confusion. No haze. Just clarity. And this time, he didn't hide it. How bad is it? He asked. Emily froze. Because that wasn't a confused man asking. That was someone who already knew. She stepped back slightly. You're not sedated right now, are you? Edward held her gaze. No. Silence. Thick. Heavy. Dangerous. You've been pretending, she said. Not a question. A realization. Edward didn't deny it. I needed to understand what was happening, he said calmly. Emily's pulse quickened. You could get me fired for this, she whispered. You could lose more than that, Edward replied. A beat. Then, she's trying to take everything, he added. Emily's eyes flickered. Because deep down, she already knew. I can't just break protocol, she said. Edward leaned slightly against the restraints. You already did. That hit hard. She looked away for a second, then back. What do you want? She asked. Edward didn't hesitate. Information. About what? Everything she's done. Who signed what? When? Emily shook her head. That's not enough. Even if you're right, no one's going to believe you. Edward's expression didn't change. They will, he said quietly. Why? Because somewhere out there, someone else was already building the other half of the truth. I'm not the only one looking into this, he said. Emily frowned. What does that mean? Before he could answer, a sound. Footsteps. In the hallway. Both of them froze. Emily stepped back immediately, her expression snapping back into professional distance. Edward's body went slack again. Eyes unfocused. Breathing shallow. The door opened. Another nurse walked in. Everything okay? She asked. Emily nodded quickly. Just checking vitals. Routine. Normal. Safe. The nurse glanced at Edward. He didn't move. Didn't react. Perfect. After a few seconds the nurse left. The door closed again. Silence returned. Emily exhaled slowly. That was too close. Edward opened his eyes again. We don't have much time, he said. She looked at him. Really looked this time. Not as a patient. Not as a file. As a man trapped in something he didn't create. What do you need? She asked. Edward's voice was steady now. Access. To what? A phone. Computer. Anything. Emily hesitated. That's impossible. Then find something possible. A pause. Then, I need to contact someone, Edward added. Emily crossed her arms slightly, thinking fast. If this goes wrong. It already has, Edward said. That ended the argument. She turned toward the door again, hand on the handle, then stopped. I can get you 5 minutes, she said quietly. Edward nodded once. That was all he needed, because 5 minutes was enough to change everything. Across the city, Daniel sat at his desk, laptop open, documents spread out. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He frowned. Answered. Hello. A pause. Then, a voice. Weak. Controlled. But unmistakably sharp. Daniel Brooks. Daniel froze. Yes. Silence. Then, this is Edward Hayes. Everything stopped. You're looking for the truth, Edward said. Daniel's grip tightened. Yes. A beat. Then, good, Edward replied. Because so am I. Daniel didn't waste a second. Where are you? He asked, already standing up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. On the other end, Edward's voice stayed calm. Too calm for a man locked inside a psychiatric facility. Doesn't matter, Edward said. What matters is, you were right. Daniel's eyes narrowed. So you know why I've been looking into your daughter. A pause. Then, I know enough, Edward replied. And I know she didn't expect you. That was the confirmation Daniel needed. Everything he had been building wasn't just theory anymore. It was real. She had you committed, Daniel said. Forged records. Pushed it through fast. Yes. No hesitation. No denial. Just truth. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing now. Then we don't have much time, he said. If she realizes you're still thinking clearly. She already suspects something, Edward cut in. Which means we move now. Now. Not later. Not carefully. Now. Daniel stopped pacing. All right, he said. Then listen to me, we're building a case. Financial fraud, medical fraud, abuse of legal authority. I've got someone on the inside pulling records. Edward's voice lowered slightly. Good. Because what she did to me isn't the only thing she's hiding. Daniel's jaw tightened. The child. Silence. Heavy. Then. You found her, Edward said. Not a question. A realization. Daniel looked toward the kitchen, where Lily's drawing still lay on the table. Yeah, he said quietly. Another pause. Longer this time. When Edward spoke again, something in his voice had changed. Not just control. Something deeper. Is she safe? Daniel didn't hesitate. Yes. A breath on the other end. Subtle. But it carried weight. Because for the first time since this began, this wasn't just about power. It was about family. We use that, Daniel said. Her secret. It's leverage. No. The answer came instantly. Firm. Daniel frowned. What do you mean no? That's the strongest piece we have. Edward's voice hardened. She's a child. Not a weapon. Silence. Daniel didn't expect that. But then again, he wasn't the one who had spent a lifetime building something only to see it twisted. Then what? Daniel asked. We expose everything else, Edward said. The records. The signatures. The timeline. Daniel exhaled slowly. That'll take time. We don't have time, Edward replied. She's already tightening control. And he was right. Because at that exact moment, across the city, Claire Hayes was no longer waiting. Claire stood in her office, phone pressed to her ear. Her expression? Gone. No warmth. No softness. Just calculation. I want everything reviewed, she said. All access logs. All staff interactions. The man on the other end hesitated. That's going to raise questions. I don't care, she cut in. Something's off. Her eyes moved toward the window, staring out at the skyline. I can feel it. Because control wasn't just about systems. It was instinct. And her instinct was screaming. Start with the night staff, she continued. Anyone who's been near him longer than necessary. A pause. Then, especially that nurse. Emily. Back at the facility, Emily stood in the records room again. Heart racing faster this time. Not from doubt. From certainty. She wasn't imagining it. This was real. She copied files. Transferred data. Every click felt louder than it should. Every second felt shorter. Because once you cross the line, there's no stepping back. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Closer. Emily froze. The screen still open. Files still visible. The door handle moved. She turned. Just as it opened, a supervisor stood there. Watching. Silent. Suspicious. Emily, he said slowly. Her heart slammed against her chest. Yes. What are you doing in here? Time stopped. Just for a second. Then, I was asked to double-check a file, she said quickly. Too quickly. The supervisor stepped inside. Eyes scanning the screen. Lingering. Too long. Then back to her. By who? Emily swallowed. Because she didn't have an answer. Not one that would save her. Edward sat still in his room. Waiting. Counting seconds in his head. Because he knew. That call had changed everything. There was no more hiding. No more pretending. The game had shifted. And now, it was moving fast. Back on the phone, Daniel spoke again. We're going to need federal involvement, he said. This is bigger than just her. Edward nodded slightly, even though Daniel couldn't see it. I know. A beat. Then, do it. No hesitation. No doubt. Bring them in. Daniel's voice lowered. Once we do, there's no going back. Edward looked toward the door. Toward the world she had locked him out of. There already isn't, he said. And somewhere far beyond both of them, the first domino had already fallen. And when the next one hit, it wouldn't just expose Claire Hayes. It would destroy everything she built on lies. The knock didn't come with warning. Came with authority. 3 sharp hits against the glass doors of Claire Hayes' office. Precise, controlled, final. Claire didn't flinch. She didn't rush to open it. She simply looked up from her desk, eyes calm, expression unreadable. Come in. The door opened. 2 men. Dark suits. Badges. And behind them more footsteps in the hallway. One of them stepped forward. Claire Hayes. She stood slowly. Yes. The man reached into his jacket, flashing his badge just long enough. Federal agents. A pause. Then, we need to ask you a few questions. Silence filled the room. Not panic. Not chaos. Just pressure. Claire tilted her head slightly. About what? The second agent stepped in now, placing a thin folder on her desk. It slid across the polished surface and stopped right in front of her. "About your father," he said. Claire glanced down at it. Didn't open it. Didn't touch it. "What about him?" she asked. The first agent's voice hardened. "About how a man with no prior psychiatric history was declared mentally unstable within 24 hours. There it was. Direct. Clean. Unavoidable." Claire finally reached for the folder. Opened it. Inside. Documents. Copies. Timestamps. Signatures. All the things she thought were buried, now laid out in front of her. Her eyes moved quickly. Scanning. Calculating. Looking for weaknesses. But there weren't any. Because this wasn't her version. This was the truth. "Where did you get this?" she asked quietly. The agent didn't answer. Instead, "We also have records of unauthorized access to hospital systems," he continued. "Multiple entries under your name." Claire closed the folder slowly, then looked up. Still calm. Still controlled. "You're making a mistake." The second agent let out a short breath. "We've heard that before." Claire stepped away from the desk. Measured. Careful. "You don't understand the situation," she said. "My father is ill. I was acting in his best interest. By forging medical records." The first agent shot back. "I didn't forge anything." "Then you won't mind explaining these timestamps." He tapped the folder. Claire's jaw tightened. Just slightly. But it was enough. Because for the first time, she didn't have an immediate answer. Across the city, Daniel stood outside the facility. This time, not alone. Black SUVs lined the curb. Agents moved in coordinated silence. No sirens. No chaos. Just precision. Jacob stood beside him, arms crossed, watching the building. "You ready for this?" Jacob asked. Daniel didn't take his eyes off the entrance. "Been ready." A beat. Then, "Let's finish it." Inside, the atmosphere had changed. Staff whispered. Doors opened and closed faster than usual. Something was happening, and everyone could feel it. Emily stood near the nurse's station, hands slightly trembling. She had already been questioned once. Not officially, but enough to know. They were looking. Her eyes shifted down the hallway, toward Edward's room. Hold on, she thought. Just a little longer. The door burst open. Not violently, but with purpose. Two agents stepped inside. Edward didn't react. He didn't need to. He already knew. "Edward Hayes," one of them said. Edward turned his head slowly, met their eyes. "Yes." The agent nodded. "We're here to get you out of here." For a moment, nothing moved. Not time. Not breath. Not even thought. Because after everything, after the lies, the control, the silence, it was over. Edward sat up slowly as they removed the restraints. The leather straps fell away like something that had never belonged there. One of the agents helped him to his feet. "You all right?" he asked. Edward nodded once. "I am now." His legs were unsteady at first, but his mind, sharp as ever. As he stepped into the hallway, he saw her, Emily, standing there, watching, relieved, terrified, brave. Edward stopped for just a second, looked at her, and said quietly, "Thank you." She didn't respond, couldn't, but her eyes said enough. Outside, the doors opened. Edward stepped out, into the light, into the air, into freedom. Daniel was waiting. They locked eyes immediately. Two men, different lives. Same truth. Daniel stepped forward. "You made it." Edward gave a faint nod. "Thanks to you." A pause. Then, Daniel added, "It's not over." Edward looked past him, at the agents, at the vehicles, at the world that had kept moving without him. "I know," he said. "And now we finish it." Back in the office, Claire stood still. The agents were still there. The folder still open. The evidence still undeniable. "You're coming with us," one of them said. Claire didn't move, didn't argue, didn't panic. She just stood there, thinking, because even now, even here, she was searching for a way out. But this time, there wasn't one. As the agent stepped closer, her control finally cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. Because the one thing she feared most had finally happened. She had lost control. And everything built on that control was about to collapse. The courtroom was quieter than Edward expected. Not silent, but heavy. Every sound, papers shifting, a chair creaking, a quiet cough, felt amplified under the weight of what was about to happen. Edward Hayes sat upright, hands folded calmly in front of him. No restraints now. No white walls. No artificial lights. Just truth. Across the room, Claire, his daughter, no longer composed in a glass tower, no longer in control of a carefully crafted world. Now, she sat at the defense table, her posture still straight but different, tighter. Her confidence had cracks. Small ones, but visible. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then sat. And just like that, it began. The prosecution didn't rush. They didn't need to, because this case was already built. Your Honor, the lead prosecutor began, stepping forward. This is a case of calculated manipulation, fraud, and abuse of power, committed not by a stranger, but by a daughter against her own father. A murmur rippled softly through the room. Claire didn't react. Her eyes stayed forward, focused, controlled. But Edward watched her. He knew her, and he saw it. The tension in her jaw, the stillness that wasn't calm but contained. Exhibits were presented, one by one. Medical records, forged timelines, access logs, each piece laid out with precision, each one removing another layer of her defense. This document, the prosecutor said, holding up a file, was signed by 3 separate specialists within 4 minutes. A pause. 3 specialists who were not even in the same building. The courtroom shifted again. Claire's lawyer stood. Objection. Overruled. The word landed hard. Final. Edward didn't move, didn't speak. But inside, he felt it. The system correcting itself. Slowly, but surely. Then came the testimony. Emily. She walked to the stand carefully, hands clasped tightly together. Sworn in. Seated. Her voice shook at first, but only at first. I reviewed Mr. Hayes' records, she said. The entries didn't match standard procedure. Can you explain what you found? The prosecutor asked. Emily nodded. There were multiple authorizations under Claire Hayes' name, more than any family member should have. And the timestamps, she swallowed. They were impossible. Claire finally moved. Just slightly. Her eyes flicked toward Emily. Sharp. Warning. But it didn't work. Because Emily had already crossed the line, and there was no going back. Then, Daniel. He stepped forward. Calm. Steady. Not part of the system, but part of the truth. State your name. Daniel Brooks. And how are you connected to this case? A pause. Then, I'm raising Claire Hayes' daughter. The room froze. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, because that changed everything. Claire's head snapped toward him. For the first time. Real emotion. Shock. Raw. Unfiltered. No, she whispered under her breath. But it was too late. Daniel continued. She abandoned her 7 years ago, he said. Left her on my doorstep. The words echoed, louder than anything else that day. The prosecutor stepped in. And why is this relevant? Daniel didn't hesitate. Because it shows a pattern. A beat. She doesn't just manipulate situations. He looked directly at Claire. She walks away from them when they stop serving her. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Claire's breathing changed. Faster now. Less controlled. Because this wasn't something she could rewrite. Edward watched it all. Every word. Every reaction. Every piece falling into place. And yet, there was no satisfaction. No victory. Just wait. Because this wasn't just a case. It was his family. The final arguments came. Clear. Direct. Damning. This was not desperation, the prosecutor said. This was design. A pause. She planned it, executed it, and expected no one to question it. The judge nodded slowly, then looked toward Claire. Do you have anything to say before sentencing? The room held its breath. Claire stood. Slowly. Her hands trembled slightly, but she didn't hide them. For the first time, she looked human. Not controlled. Not perfect. Just exposed. Her eyes moved across the room. Landed on Edward. For a long moment. Neither of them spoke. Then, I didn't want to hurt you, she said. Her voice cracked. Just once. But you were going to lose everything anyway. Edward's expression didn't change. That wasn't your decision to make, he replied quietly. Silence. Then the judge spoke. And just like that, it was decided. Not with emotion. Not with anger. But with law. And consequences. As Claire was led away, she didn't look at anyone else. Just Edward. One last time. As if searching for something. Forgiveness. Understanding. Anything. But Edward didn't move. Because some actions don't just break trust. They redefine it. And now, there was only one thing left to decide. What came after justice? The house felt quieter than ever. Not empty. Just different. Edward Hayes stood by the window, looking out at the same city he had spent his entire life building his place in. The skyline hadn't changed. But everything else had. Behind him the room was warm, soft light. The faint sound of a kettle beginning to boil in the kitchen. The quiet hum of a life that had been put on hold. And was finally starting again. He wasn't in a hospital bed anymore. He wasn't fighting for control. He had it back. But strangely, that wasn't what stayed on his mind. It was her. The courtroom had ended days ago. The sentence had been delivered. Claire Hayes, his daughter, was now just another name in the system. Years behind bars. Consequences sealed. Justice served. And yet, Edward didn't feel like he had one. He turned away from the window slowly. On the table, a drawing, crayons, bright colors, messy lines. And in the center, 3 stick figures holding hands. He picked it up carefully. A small smile touched his face. Because this was something real. Mr. Hayes. Daniel's voice came from the doorway. Edward looked up. Come in. Daniel stepped inside, hands in his pockets, still carrying that quiet steadiness he always had. Not flashy, not loud, just dependable. How are you holding up? Daniel asked. Edward considered the question, then nodded. I've been through worse, he said. A beat. Then, not like this but worse. Daniel gave a faint smile. I believe that. Silence settled between them. Not awkward. Just honest. Then Edward glanced down at the drawing again. She made this. Daniel nodded. Yeah. This morning. A pause. She wanted to show you. Edward's grip on the paper tightened slightly. For a moment, he didn't speak. Because this wasn't just a child. This was the piece of the story he never knew existed. The part his daughter tried to erase. But couldn't. Can I? Edward asked quietly. Daniel didn't need him to finish. I'll get her. A few seconds later. Small footsteps. Slow. Careful. Lily stood in the doorway, holding the edge of the wall like she wasn't sure if she should come in. Edward turned toward her. For the first time. Really seeing her. Not as a fact. Not as evidence. But as family. She looked nervous. Curious. A little scared. Hi, she said softly. Edward crouched down slightly, lowering himself to her level. Hi, Lily. She blinked. You know my name? He smiled gently. I know a lot about you. That didn't fully answer her question. But it was enough. She stepped a little closer. Eyes drifting to the drawing in his hand. I made that, she said. I can tell, Edward replied. It's beautiful. Her face lit up just a little. Then she pointed. That's me. And that's Dad. She paused. Then pointed to the third figure. And that's you. Edward felt something shift in his chest. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger. Not control. Something softer. Something heavier. Me? He asked. She nodded. Yeah. Because you're family too. Simple. Honest. Undeniable. Edward looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he reached out his hand. Not forcing. Not rushing. Just offering. Lily hesitated. Then, she took it. Later that evening, the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows across the room. Edward sat at the table, Lily beside him, showing him more drawings. Daniel leaned against the counter, watching quietly. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt still. Not broken. Not controlled. Just real. Edward glanced toward the window again, then back at them, and he made a decision. Not about money. Not about power. About something harder. Daniel, he said. Daniel looked up. Yes. Edward took a breath. I don't want her to grow up carrying this, what her mother did. Daniel nodded slowly. She won't, he said. Edward looked at Lily, then back at Daniel. And Claire. A pause. The name still heavy, still complicated. I'm not going to fight her anymore. Daniel frowned slightly. What do you mean? Edward's voice softened. I'm going to visit her. Silence. Because that wasn't expected. After everything. After the betrayal. Why? Daniel asked. Edward looked down at his hands. Then, because if I don't, he said quietly, this doesn't end. A beat. I'm not doing it for her. He glanced at Lily. I'm doing it for what's left of this family. The next day, behind reinforced glass, Claire sat across from him. No elegance. No control. Just reality. She looked thinner. Tired. Different. When she saw him, her eyes filled. But she didn't speak. Not at first. Neither did he. Then, I came to tell you something, Edward said. Claire's voice trembled. What? Edward held her gaze. I forgive you. The words landed softly, but they carried everything. Claire broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Because forgiveness was the one thing she never expected, and the one thing she didn't think she deserved. Back at the house, Lily laughed at something Daniel said. Edward watched them, then looked at the drawing again. 3 figures. Holding hands. Imperfect. But together. He placed it gently on the table. And for the first time, he understood something that had taken him 70 years to learn. You can lose everything you built. But if you choose to rebuild with love instead of control, you don't just get your life back. You get something better. And maybe the real question isn't, who betrayed you? But, after everything, what kind of person do you choose to become?